Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of FFB from the 50, where we tackle every issue from both sides of the field, brought to you by JDP Media. I am your host, Dan Amsler, and today we're going to look back at Week 2 and take a look ahead towards Week 3. But before we do, we've got some special shout-outs that I want to do. TJ and Ava, hello. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you watching the channel. So little Mister and Ava, I'm looking forward to seeing you again. And also, Miss Terry Brown, thanks for making some comments on our social media posts and following us on here. Happy to give you both shout outs. Happy to give you a shout out too, Terry. All right, so here we go. Now, we have a lot of information for you today, so I'm going to cheat just a little bit. I've actually got a sheet of paper here with some stats because anything I tell you, I want to make sure we're backing up. So I'm going to give you, starting this week with my 5 up. These are the 5 players who I feel like improved their fantasy stock the most during week 2. And then we'll do the 5 down. All right. Number 1 for 5 up, we have to start with Tua. I mean, look at the numbers that he put up this week. Over 460 passing yards and 6 touchdowns against Baltimore's defense. There were a lot of question marks about him this year. We were really high on his weapons with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Mike Gesicki as his tight end. Chase Edmonds as his running back, as a capable pass catcher out of the backfield. But Tua was not getting a lot of love. There are a lot of questions in Miami about whether or not he was truly the man. So we have to start there. My first up is Tua. Right now, through 2 weeks, he has 739 passing yards with a 7-2 touchdown to interception ratio. Number 2, another quarterback, Jared Goff. I'm just as surprised as most to put him on this list, but he has definitely earned it. Through 2 weeks, he has passed for 471 yards and has a 6-1 touchdown to interception ratio and a quarterback rating of 100.2. Jared Goff, we see what you're doing. You definitely have the weapons to work with. Congratulations, you made the 5 up list. The number 3 for fantasy stock up after week 2 is David Montgomery. I was down on him a little bit in week 1. Khalil Herbert was averaging more yards per carry, but the Bears absolutely seemed committed to getting David Montgomery the ball. Last week against Green Bay, he averaged over 8 yards per carry and went over 120 yards. All right, number 4, Garrett Wilson from the New York Jets. Coming into the season, I was really high on Elijah Moore, and I still am. But there is no denying what the rookie is doing. So Garrett Wilson has 14 targets with 8 receptions, 102 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week for the Jets in their comeback victory against the Cleveland Browns. Now, I will say, I'm going to put an asterisk next to this. Garrett Wilson, you've made this list now, but that's based upon the play of Joe Flacco. We'll see what happens when Zach Wilson comes back. All right, number 5, Christian Kirk. Through 2 games, the Jacksonville wide receiver has 12 receptions, 195 yards. He's averaging 16.3 yards per reception and already has 2 touchdowns on the season. He is definitely the number 1 receiver for Jacksonville, and that offense looks a lot more explosive this year than I thought they were going to. All right, and again, because this is my list, I'm going to give you a 6th. So the bonus for the player that is up this week, Jimmy G. Welcome back. With Trey Lance's injury, it looks like you are back to the helm, and you're going to lead the 49ers again this year, so your stock is definitely up. All right, 5 down. And I'm going to start with a running back, Travis Etienne. Now, here's what's really interesting. Travis Etienne is actually averaging 5.2 yards per rush, which is more than James Robinson is. He also has 7 targets in the passing game to Robinson's 4 through 2 weeks. But James Robinson is getting the touchdowns, not Travis Etienne. So even though Etienne is still gaining more yards per rush and seeing more work as the receiver, James Robinson is the one who seems to be doing the most with those touches and scoring the points. Travis Etienne's stock is down this week simply because James Robinson is too good to be ignored. Number 2, Rashad Penny. Rashad looked pretty good in week 1 against the Denver Broncos. But in week 2, he came out flat against the San Francisco 49ers. Did not have the best rushing performance. Plus, Kenneth Walker has returned, which should cut into his work. So Rashad Penny is my number 2 stock down. Number 3, another running back, Ramondre Stevenson. Now, Ramondre is not doing terrible this year. He does have 17 carries for 72 yards, but he's only averaging 4.2 yards per carry. Damian Harris is actually averaging right at 5 yards per carry, so Damian Harris is actually averaging more per rush. And when you look at the receiving work, which is where Ramondre Stevenson was supposed to get the most value this year, he was really touted, and the hype machine was full force for him. As the receiving back, he only has 3 receptions for 6 yards on 4 targets through 2 weeks. So Ramondre is not getting the work in the passing game that we had hoped for, and Damian Harris is actually averaging more yards per carry than he is. Those two combined doesn't look good. I know Ramondre Stevenson got more looks this week and more usage in the rush game, but if he's not doing anything with those looks, that's not going to continue, and it doesn't matter to us anyway. We need production. Fantasy football is all about the stats. All right, my number 4 for stock down this week is tight end TJ Houshmandzadeh. I'm so sorry, TJ Hawkinson. There's that Houshmandzadeh again. I will never live that one down in my first draft. TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson's stats for this year, 7 catches for 64 yards and 0 touchdowns. And folks, that's not his stat line from week 2. That is his stat line for the season. That's just not going to cut it for somebody who everybody thought was a consensus top 5 to top 10 tight end. Number 5 for stock down is another tight end, Kyle Pitts. Now, this is kind of a fluky stat, but this is the truth. He had the exact same stat line in week 1 and week 2. He had 2 catches for 19 yards week 1, 2 catches, 19 yards in week 2. And I have to say, I really just do not understand this. They drafted Kyle Pitts early. He's the best weapon they have on offense. I'm not sure why they're not scheming him more into the game plan, but 2 catches for 19 yards each week does not make him a fantasy relevant tight end. And a lot of folks had him going in the first 3 rounds, if not the first 4 rounds of their drafts. So Kyle Pitts makes it on my 5 down for this week. For my bonus for stock down, I'm going to say Darnell Mooney is going to be my bonus stock down. There were not a lot of high expectations for the Bears offense and the skill position players going into the fantasy season, but we all hope that Darnell Mooney would just make up for that in the volume alone. Unfortunately, through 2 games, he has 2 catches for 4 yards. If you're in a PPR league, that is 2.4 points. If you're in a standard league, he has literally 0.4 points through 2 weeks. And if you want to throw Cole Kmet onto that as well, those were the only 2 options that were supposed to have any relevance in the fantasy football world for the Chicago Bears skill position players from the receiving standpoint. And neither one of them are cutting the mustard. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look ahead at week 3. There's a lot of news notes and injuries that we need to focus on. The first one we've already mentioned with the Jimmy G and his stock up. Trey Lance is out for the season with a broken ankle. That makes Jimmy G the starter. Now, I will say for me, that's going to be an upgrade for the skill position players for the San Francisco 49ers. We know that Jimmy G has made George Kittle relevant. We know with Jimmy G back there, that Deebo Samuel has been relevant. And I still think Brandon Ayuk will be relevant as well. The nice thing about Jimmy G is he's not going to steal a lot of rushing yards away from that team. I know he had a rushing touchdown this past week against Seattle. It would have been nice if Jeff Wilson could have gotten that touchdown since I had him starting, but be that as it may, Jimmy G went ahead and did that as a quarterback keeper. But I do think that that is an upgrade. At least with Jimmy G, we know what we're getting. We're getting some stability for those players. All right, another one to keep our eyes on. Justin Herbert is now day-to-day with a rib cartilage fracture. It sounds like this is one of those things that's going to be all about pain management. I've had a similar injury when I played football. It is hard to move. It's hard to breathe. So we'll see. They may give him a shot to numb things down. Let's hope that the doctors and trainers that are there don't do to him what they did to Tyrod Taylor last year. All right, next one is James Conner is day-to-day with an ankle injury. It doesn't sound like it's severe, but James Conner does have a history of injuries. So in the meantime, I really don't see any one running back, either Darrell Wilson or Eno Benjamin, who are really worth picking up because they're going to split the load pretty evenly. So right now, I'm kind of staying away from that entire backfield. If you're looking for somebody whose stock might be up because of that, especially if you're playing daily fantasy football, you might want to look at Kyler Murray because he might end up being the best rushing option that the Arizona Cardinals have right now. Jerry Jeudy is also day-to-day with an injury. We'll see if he can get through it and actually play this week. And then I just want to give a quick shout-out to Dane Jackson, the cornerback for the Buffalo Bills that was hurt last night. A very scary injury if you were watching that game. He was taken off the field in an ambulance. Reports came out today that he was released from the hospital. He has feelings in all extremities, and he should not have any long-term repercussions from that. But that was an absolutely terrifying injury. Dane, I am so happy that you were okay and were able to go home today. All right, so moving on. Just with some news going into week 3, Joe Flacco is playing really good football. I wouldn't say it's the best that he's ever played, and I wouldn't call it great football, but it was good enough to lead the Jets for a comeback victory against Cleveland this week. I'm not stating that there's going to be a quarterback controversy brewing in New York, but Flacco looked pretty legit, and he's making those wide receivers relevant, so that's something to keep an eye on. Hey, we had a Josh Gordon sighting. Josh Gordon was actually elevated to the Tennessee Titans active roster and saw 1 target last night. In other news, Joe Burrow, he cannot stay upright. He has been sacked 13 times in 2 games. That kind of pressure is really starting to hurt if you are T. Higgins or Jamar Chase owners. I'm having a hard time figuring this out. They went out and spent a lot of money on the offensive line, bringing in Lael Collins, Alex Kappa, and Ted, I'm hoping I pronounced this right, Karras? I have no clue. Bengals fans, let me know in the comment section. Spell it out for me. They spent a lot of money on that offensive line, and they can't keep Joe Burrow upright. It's going to be a very long season for him. We were really hoping that the offensive line would improve. That would help out Joe Burrow, the entire passing game, and Joe Mixon in the running game. So we'll see. In other news, Cole Beasley signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers today. And a move that should come as a surprise to nobody, considering how beat up that wide receiver group is already, and looking at Mike Evans' suspension. Which brings us to Mike Evans' suspension. So today he was appealing that suspension, but as a repeat offender, it's very possible that that will get denied, and he will have to serve that suspension. Marlon Mack was added to the 49ers active roster. Tyrion Davis-Price is now also out with injury, along with Elijah Mitchell. So if you remember last week, we talked about he was actually signed to their practice squad. This week he was elevated to the active roster. I'm not sure that that's going to have any major fantasy football ramifications, but he is there if you're looking for a deep flyer. All right. So do you want to talk about 2 teams heading in the opposite direction right now? And I want to pump the brakes on both of these teams, so we're going to be a little realistic. I'm going to be Debbie Downer for one group, and I'm going to lift up another. So, starting with the team on the rise, let's talk about the Dolphins. You can't look at what they did and not be impressed by the skill position players and the fantasy output that they had. They had 3 players that scored over 30 and possibly over 40 depending upon your scoring settings this past week in fantasy football, with Tua going over 40, both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill going over 30, and again, possibly over 40 depending upon your scoring settings. So from a fantasy football perspective, the Dolphins are definitely trending up. Mike Gesicki saw some action in the passing game and actually had a decent stat line. The running game was pretty much non-existent, but that's because Miami was trying to play from behind and catch up with the Baltimore Ravens, which of course they did. If you had a chance to watch that game, that was pretty awesome. So from a fantasy perspective, the entire Dolphins is a team that's heading up right now. That is a team that I'm interested in getting some stock in. Now, the first game, they didn't put up the best stat lines. That was against the New England Patriots defense. I do want to pump the brakes a little bit. If you look at last year, the Baltimore Ravens secondary was pretty bad. They did spend some money trying to address that in the offseason. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens this week when they play Buffalo. So week 3, Buffalo versus Miami. That will tell us what we want to know about those skill position players, I think better than what we've seen so far. So they're a team that's on the rise. A team that is on the decline is the Colts. They laid an egg against Jacksonville. Adam, another shout out to you. You were the one that reminded me that the Colts have not won in Jacksonville since your kids were born. So TJ, Ava, another shout out to you too. But the Colts did lay an egg. Now, I want to urge caution. Do not give up on the Colts players. One of the things that we have to look at is what happened and look at the possible reasons behind it. So we know that Michael Pittman was out and Alec Pierce was out. So Matty Ice was out, or was without his number one wide receiver and his slot receiver. Now, Paris Campbell should have lined up as the number one wide receiver, but he obviously was not up for the task. Now, I know Matty Ice had a rough day through the interceptions, just could not get anything going. But again, when you look at the situation, I think that explains a lot of it. So, Indianapolis, I want you to think really long and hard about your wide receiver depth, and that might be the number one reason you need to go out right now and sign Will Fuller and get him on that roster. You need wide receiver depth. Will Fuller would fit your team pretty well. All right. Also, having said that, do not give up on Jonathan Taylor. That was a negative game script from the very start because of those turnovers and getting behind early. Jonathan Taylor will have brighter days ahead. Do not give up on him. One of the more positive things to come out of that game was Nyheim Hines, the usage in the passing game. So while Jonathan Taylor didn't have the game, again, the game script wasn't in his favor, but it was nice to see Matty Ice looking towards Nyheim Hines. All right, so just a real quick bonus thing I want to let you know. There are 3 games that I'm really looking forward to. Number 1 is Bills versus Dolphins. Told you exactly why. We have 2 very explosive offenses, 2 fairly decent defenses. I want to see where this goes. I am also intrigued by the Lions versus the Vikings. Can the Lions put up over 30 points again? And then the Packers versus the Buccaneers. I think anytime you have Aaron Rodgers going against Tom Brady, that's must-see TV. So those are the games that I'm looking forward to. If you could, go down to the comment section. Let me know which teams or players you think are on the rise for fantasy purposes and which ones are on the decline and why. If you would like a shout out in one of these videos, go down to the comment section and let me know. I would love to say your name on the video. And until next time, see ya.